Flashback to 2014. Or so. I moved out on my own in 2013 and moved into an old house converted into a 2-floor apartment, directly across from my future in-laws. The downstairs neighbors were loud, blaring music at all hours, yes, all of the hours, wouldn't cut the grass or take out the trash on our shared schedule. Crappy neighbors, but never bothered me directly. The guy was pretty chill when sober and would turn the music down a little when I texted him. He was okay until his girlfriend moved in. Now add shouting matches to the mix, and all of a sudden my request to turn down the music makes him turn it up. I can barely walk on my super thin floor without her banging on the ceiling with a broom. I was okay since I am a heavy sleeper and could sleep through anything. My wife moved in, and I quickly found out that she is quite the opposite. Fan on turned at a certain angle in the doorway of the bathroom. Door closed halfway, blackout curtains with them taped to the wall so zero light comes through, zero sounds other than the fan. You get the idea.
I told her that we can't expect them to remain silent when she's ready for bed. We need to be reasonable. But the wall rattling music needs to stop during the night.
She hated it during the day, but I told her there's nothing we can do then. So she would go to her parents' house a lot during the day. I talked to neighbor guy, and he said yeah man that's cool, but it turns out the girlfriend wasn't having it and his attitude then changed too. Yeah well it's our house so you can go screw yourself if you think you can tell us what to do and you can move out if you don't like it. Something definitely had to change at some point. So I did the only thing I could do. I fought fire with fire, and maliciously complied with the law to the T. I could only report them for noise after 11 p.m. I now forget the morning hour when the noise could start, but I believe it was 9 a.m. My dad has these huge old concert speakers in his garage. Professional grade, black leather bound, 5 feet tall and 3 feet wide, and a pretty nice, vintage stereo/amp. He has 2, but my apartment was so small I sadly only had room for 1. We replaced our coffee table with this thing, laid face down onto our thin, office carpet. Tired of his tunes, I tested this Geneva Convention breaking device when they weren't home. Holy cow. I had to take everything down from tables, counters and shelves because they would shake off. I prepared audio files to feed the stereo. I was giddy like a kid with a new Christmas toy.
I turned it on when I left for work and got my wife up to send her to her parents.
I came home from work and hung out at her parents until it was close to bedtime. They resisted for 3 days. On day 2, I found a pile of manure on my doorstep, but it didn't faze me. I cycled between sine/saw/square waves and clashing chords, marching music, Washington Post march on loop, preaching clips. They weren't just atheist, but outspoken anti-Christian, so it was a must. The most stupid songs you could think of, Captain Planet theme song, chicken dance, etc. This poor old house rattled in ways I didn't think possible. The vibrations from the sine wave would make your vision blur. I eventually got a text from him that read, "Sorry man you can stop now." I did not. He needed a few more days to let it sink in. Plus I had so much fun putting it together. They complained to the authorities and the landlord. There was nothing they could do since I wasn't doing anything wrong.
I didn't even hear music during the time of peace to follow.
It was so quiet. They would build up their courage and try again every few weeks when I wasn't home, but my wife was. I then showed her how to tame the beast so she could let it loose while I was away. I had to give them a spanking every now and then, but they learned. They were so happy when we moved out. I lived across the street from a very bored stay-at-home mom whose excess idle time turned her into an insufferable busybody. One day, her husband backed out of the driveway and slammed into my roommate's car parked on the curb. He apologized, gave us his insurance info, and took care of it. He was never a problem, because he accepted responsibility for what he did. His wife, however, demanded that we never ever park any cars at the curb again, because we can't get out of our driveway otherwise. The street was very wide. She was just completely unable to accept that the accident was her husband's fault, and figured we were somehow responsible for it, ergo we were responsible for preventing it in the future. We told her that we would avoid parking there whenever possible, but that we still had the right to park on the street, and that if necessary we would still do so, and that it was her and her husband's responsibility to avoid hitting other people's parked cars when backing out of the driveway. She wasn't happy with that answer, but just told us we better stay out of her family's way, and stormed off. One day, she came storming over, banging on the front door, cussing us out. We got her on our security camera saying, "If you don't move that car in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to total it with my truck. It'll be your fault, and you'll have to pay for the damage to my vehicle." To this, I simply responded, "I don't know whose car that is, but I didn't park it there. I have you on camera, so if you do anything to that car, I'll have to call the authorities and hand over this tape." She then threatened to sue me for invasion of privacy for recording her, and still insisted that we move the car, even though it wasn't our property. We just ignored her, and she did not do anything to the car. We did keep the recording, though. A few weeks later, I had a friend visit from out of town. He parked his car on the curb, and then started unloading some stuff from his trunk. She came storming out, screaming and cussing at him. I have told you repeatedly never park your car on this curb. If you don't move it, I am going to total it, and you can pay for a new car, as well as the damage you do to mine. He tried to calm her down, and asked if there was somewhere else he could park, and she replied you can park it in hell, because that's where you'll be after I ruin you. But there was something crucial she didn't know. Unfortunately for her, he had his dash cam running the whole time, and it captured everything. He called the authorities and she was detained for threatening to commit vandalism. A few days later, she left a long-winded hate letter in our mailbox. It was written as if it were an open letter from the entire neighborhood, and it basically said that nobody knows who you are, and everyone wishes you would move away, and nobody wants you living in our neighborhood. Thing is, she forgot about the security cameras.
I took the video of her opening my mailbox, which included her taking all our letters out of the mailbox and rifling through them, and I gave them to the post office.
This led to her getting detained a second time that week. After that, we used her 2 arrests, our collection of security and dash cam footage, and her letter to get a restraining order against her that actually prohibited her from entering her own home. But we didn't stop there. We called the authorities every time we saw her because she was in violation of the order. She ended up having to live in a hotel room, and her husband came over, apologized to us, and asked if we would drop the restraining order so his wife could come home. I told him I would do it, but only if she wrote me, my wife, our roommates, and the friend of mine she threatened a 1-page apology for her harassment, and that she would promise to never, ever contact us again for any reason whatsoever moving forward.
I received no apology, and the house went on the market a week later.
Some people. I was working for a small medical supply company as the IT manager. Business was bad, and eventually the IT department had to downsize to just me. During this time, they brought in a new CFO that I had to report directly to. Let's call her Pam. Pam had zero knowledge of IT and how things worked. Her motto was if it ain't broke, don't fix it. PC/server life cycles didn't exist. We don't have to pay for licensing to keep our firewall updated. It's working just fine now.
I went from having an annual budget to a wish list where she would deny everything I asked for.
The couple that owned the company were real pieces of garbage too. One time we had a quarterly meeting and people were asking about how secure their jobs were. The owners said that nobody was getting laid off and that our jobs were all secure. This was at 5 p.m. on a Wednesday. The very next morning at 9 a.m., they laid off 6 people. At noon, one of the owners showed up to show off the Escalade that he had just purchased that morning. During the first 6 months that Pam was there, she started firing everyone that worked for the old CFO and replaced them with her friends and family. Honestly, 3 of her bridesmaids from her wedding a few years prior got hired to replace those that she fired. I knew I was on borrowed time. After she had been there for 9 months, I was the only one left out of what was about a dozen people that worked for the old CFO.
I knew my time was running out.
I had been looking for work, but the 2008 crash just happened and the job market in my area went south quickly. Sure enough, she called me into HR and blindsided me with an entirely trumped up charge that she claimed happened the day before. I was working with the VP of sales on a project that entire day, so I had a witness. I asked to bring him in since my boss was lying and was told, "This is not about him, this is about you." Remember kids, HR is there to protect the business, not do what is right. The next morning, I get introduced to an IT expert who just so happens to be Pam's 21-year-old nephew. He was to shadow me and evaluate everything that I did to see if we could streamline any processes. In other words, they wanted me to train him to do my job. I quickly learned that this kid had absolutely no knowledge of IT. He's the kid people think is an IT expert because he can hook up a PlayStation to a TV. He didn't even know how to join a PC to a domain. So I knew what had to be done. The inventory, billing, and shipping and receiving were all run by scripts that I created on the server. They were all run using the domain admin account. I raised quite a fuss about giving him the domain admin account in front of Pam. I then loudly proclaimed that I was going to change the password to it since you can't have people who don't work for the company to have admin access to our network.
I was overruled and was told to give it to him.
I complied, but I also showed him multiple times how to change passwords on the domain. I even had him write it down to make sure that he could do it. I really stressed the importance of changing the admin password and deleting his local account the second he is no longer consulting with us to him. I showed him a few things, but nothing in regards to what really made the company run, that day. There wasn't enough time in a year to bring this kid up to speed on how to run that place due to his complete ignorance of IT. I come into work the next day and sure enough I was let go because her nephew had found my skills lacking in many areas. I collect my last paycheck and head home. The next morning, I get a call from the CFO and owners. Apparently, her nephew wasn't quite up to speed on everything we did there and she was graciously offering to pay me my regular salary to come in as a consultant and get her nephew up to speed on the IT infrastructure. I told her that I was now an independent contractor, and if she wanted my services I was going to charge her $200 per hour with a 250-hour minimum. At that point, She told me that she was going to call the authorities for what I did if I didn't come in and fix everything. My response was just so we're clear, you fired me, replaced me with a completely unqualified idiot, and now you're threatening to call the authorities on me if I don't come in and fix what he did. I'll hold, please call them and let me know what they said. She started cursing at me and hung up the phone. Turns out, her nephew did actually learn something from me. He changed the admin password after I had left. The one that ran all the scripts for inventory, billing, shipping, and ordering. According to some of my coworkers, the place was dead in the water for several days until they could get a real consultant in to go through the documentation that I had created and fix the issue. The nephew was immediately fired and Pam was gone within a month.